when I loop back around, you're going to be able to see that lavender scallop pushed out a crazy amount of roots, not only from where I had severed it from the stem, but from where each of the new leaves were growing. And that was pretty crazy, but it did not bring any of the new growth to like full maturity in the sense that it was ready to separate from the parent leaf. So they all did stay relatively connected. And then the grapetopium in the cactus soil was not as intense as the roots that the lavender scallops had grown. And they seemed to have trouble growing on the darker surfaces, which I did say was probably because there's less reflected going on below them, and they seemed to just like the mediums that were lighter in color. Help them not stretch for the light. This depletes their energy, which they can put into doing better things such as gas exchange and nutrient absorption and pushing out new growth and elongating their roots to find better sources of water. The vermiculite, though, was a very interesting one for me to kind of remove the succulents from, because when I did pull up that more dead-looking leaf in the vermiculite, you can kind of see that I placed like 4 new leaves like to the side, and there was that dead looking leaf, because when I did go to pick it up, the leaves just fell straight off. So the vermiculite did bring one of the lavender scallops to maturity enough where they could push out the growth so that it felt like it was good enough to be independent on its own. That was the only leaf that did bring them to full maturity, but give me a second. I'm just looking at my notes real quick. The graphitopium basically in the vermiculite did not grow as well. You can see right here, did not grow as well as the lavender scallops did. There's less roots, there's less new growth, there's more stretching for the light. You can see the other leaves didn't push out as much growth as the other ones, but there is growth there. And if you look really closely on that leaf that's kind of turned up on its side, there was some new growth under there. So each leaf did push out some new growth, but they did not all really bring them to full maturity. Sand was really interesting to examine because the roots were kind of fragile when I pulled them out. They felt like they were gonna break. I did spray them so that you can kind of observe them without the sand on it, like you could do with the small and the large gravel, as well as the moss. The soils were relatively hard to clear off of the roots, which is why there's so much just left in there, but you can kind of see how it did develop and hold on to that soil. So the lavender scallops seem to be worse off than the grapetopiums in the sand. They were not super bad, but the roots didn't appear to be as developed as the little grapetopium roots did, which did also have some like leaf development. Moving on to the small gravel, there was a rather interesting difference between the lavender scallops and the grapetopiums in both the small and the large gravel, especially the large gravel, which I will get to in a second. But the roots kind of, because they were weaving in between rocks, they stuck to the shape of the rocks when I pulled them out. You can see they kind of look like curly hair. It's very interesting. They remained lighter in color, which is probably due to their exposure to light, but they did also like really grow down into that medium, which is pretty good. They were consistent on 3 leaves of each of the different plant species. So what I'm saying by this is 6 out of 8 of the leaves in there had pushed out new growth. One of the lavender scallops failed to push out new growth, and this was also consistent with one of the grapetopiums, but the other 3 of both of those varieties did push out new growth. The lavender scallops may not have developed as well as the Gripotopiums did, but they still did develop. Um, yeah, the large gravel though was very interesting to look at because you can see that the lavender scallops struggled a lot more than the Gripotopiums did. The Gripotopiums actually did really good in the large gravel. I think this was the best medium for them. I'm not gonna lie. The leaves were rather close together, and the roots were pretty long, and just like the small gravel, they had kind of stuck to the shape of the rocks, which was pretty cool to see. You can see that there's kind of a leaf that is completely depleted of all of its color, which is due to, like, if the succulent is having a hard time growing, it's just going to push out as much growth as it can to kind of absorb nutrients. So it really sucked out all the nutrients that were in that parent leaf and then pushed out some new growth to see if that would be able to then find a way to kind of grow in the medium. So going on to the moss, the roots were similar in both plant varieties. They really liked to grow down into that material. Like I said, when I was going over the first examination, they were like really stuck to that material when I tried to pull them out. So I kind of had to go in there with a knife and kind of cut away at the moss a little bit so I didn't destroy those roots while I was pulling them out. But it was really kind of weird to observe because they had, rather than like extensive root systems, they had like one larger root, which would either kind of separate off into smaller roots, or they would grow one other larger root and that would just anchor into the bottom of the moss. So it was almost like they didn't need to really stretch for water because it was kind of all around them. So they chose a place, went to the place, and just really stayed. And that root was pretty strong that they did have if they had that singular root. There was a lot more defects in the mothers, like the lavender scallops, when compared to the Gripotopiums in the moss, though. Okay, I know this is a rather long project, but this slide I'm just going to go over. Like, you can see that I put all the mothers in a pot, and I thought they looked really good all there. So I'm just going to pause it real quick. Yeah. The really big one that you can see, that's a mother that I had started on my own before I did the project, which is why it looks so much more developed than all the other ones that are in there. But yeah, they all look relatively uniform. You can see a couple that are stretching. There's more that are closer to the dirt. I do think that the medium that the lavender scallops grew the best in was the vermiculite. They weren't stretching towards the light a lot. They had extensive root systems. One of the mother leaves was able to bring some of her new development to the point where they were able to separate from each other without me really having to tug at it to get it off. They really just fell off when I touched them, which is very interesting. And then in the case of the Gripotopiums, I think they did the best on the large gravel. Because you could see that the growth that had appeared, the roots were really strong, they were good, they were long, they were able to find water and kind of withstand the effects of their environment, and the leaves were really close together, keeping that classic shape that the Gripotopium has, where you kind of look at it and it looks almost like an echeveria kind of, or like a chicken and a hen plant, if you know what that is, or like a rose when you look at it from the top, where they're all close together and they kind of fan out, which is really good. So I mean, basically this just my hypothesis, to go over my hypothesis real quick. My hypothesis, I guess, was half correct, because if we're gonna say that one of the plants did the best in vermiculite, that means that I hypothesized relatively correct. But I did not think that the gravel was going to do half as good as it did at growing any of the succulents, and probably going to actually implement that into how I do start propagating stuff, because I really liked the results of that. But it seemed that the factors that you really have to consider when you are propagating a leaf and trying to bring it to the best point of development that you can is the surface area of the leaf and of the new development that it's going to bring up, and how it's able to absorb light, and what the medium is that the roots will be able to navigate through the best. the leaves of the roots of the lavender scallops did not do too good in the large gravel, which is probably because it likes that dirt to kind of hold on to it. You could see in the cactus soil that those roots had extensively grown. And they also did that in the vermiculite. The only reason that I say that the vermiculite is better than the cactus soil is because in the cactus soil, if you looked at the lavender scallops, they were really reaching for the light, and they weren't doing that in the vermiculite at all on any of the plants that were developing. So that's a really negative thing, and it's just a lot better for the plant if it's not doing that, so it doesn't waste its energy. Yes, I am sorry that this was so long, but I hope that it was well worth your time, because I think it was well worth my time. I know you're also a gardener just like I am. I'm not sure if you do succulents or anything like that, but maybe this will change the way that you consider how you propagate things, because it definitely changed the way that I consider how I propagate things. Thank you for listening, and thank you for a great semester.